We are starting. Okay, here we go. We are live. Very exciting and very important conversation we're having today. Welcome to What's Wrong with Richard Rushfield. Today, joined by a very special guest, Elizabeth Joyce is leading a campaign to save Letterboxd, which I can't tell you how what an important thing that is for me. I think for a lot of us in the kind of online film community and here in the in the film stack world, Letterbox is really a special place where people can celebrate film and enjoy it and share it, and we see so much potential there. When the news that big studio came out last week, that big studios were kicking the tires on this, I think a shudder of fear went through a lot of us. That okay, another once again, we can't have nice things here because one of them will surely take it and ruin it for their own purposes. But there's reason for hope, says our guest today, Elizabeth Joyce, who's been leading a campaign to take over Letterboxd and and make it a community-owned and operated venture here. So I'm really excited to have you. I'm excited and nervous to have hope. It's not an emotion I feel a lot, so not totally comfortable with it, but I want to try it on for size in this case. So tell us first how you got into this whole buying social media sites racket, and you have a very interesting orientation to this that is not the traditional. I worked my way up through the Goldman Sachs hedge fund unit and made my first billion when I was 23 and all that. So tell us how you got into all this and where it's taking you.
I would love to, and thank you. I'm so honored to be here talking to you. So I came to this as a longtime social activist, social entrepreneur, and academic, an economic sociologist. And so in 2013, I launched my first social enterprise. I was one of the first public benefit corporations in Massachusetts. And through that process, really learned the ins and outs of how critical it is that your funding source, your governance structure, and the community are all in alignment with each other. Because if those things are not all in alignment, you cannot have a sustainable, mission-oriented business. And that is where I come from, is the world in which I spent a lot of time working in nonprofit organizations and academic centers. And nonprofits are critical and important and do great work. And also, we can't all be nonprofits because we do need to generate, right? There needs to be revenue. There needs to be economic vitality in order for mission-driven organizations to do their work. But we've gotten to a place, certainly in this country, where there is a binary presented as if the only two options are unregulated predatory capitalism and like donor-dependent philanthropy. And it's the spot in the middle that is actually the juiciest, right? That's the most interesting, where in the 1970s, Milton Friedman and his buddies convinced everyone that businesses were exempt from the social contract and in fact were suckers if they thought they were part of it. And that's the downfall moment, right? The downfall moment is the place where we just accept that the only purpose of businesses is to make money and that they don't have any obligation to be a decent member of society. So where I come to that, so I went to NYU as an undergrad intending to study film and human rights policy. And I moved forward on human rights policy. Not that I didn't love film, but I knew I wasn't moving to LA. As you said before, I don't have the normal path into this in terms of sort of, 15, 20 years in the industry or 15, 20 years as a tech entrepreneur in the traditional sense. But what I do have is all of those years studying business models and how alternative business models need to be constructed essentially to do what I said at the beginning, which is align all of those incentives, right? Align the incentives of the investors, the incentives of the company, the incentives of the community that's using the product or service, and move everything forward. And so through that process, right, so I started my first business in 2013, and I ran that from 2013 to 2020, and I bootstrapped it the whole way. I never took outside investment. And the reason I never took outside investment was because at that time, I didn't find a large enough group of mission-driven investors who were willing to, we were manufacturing a product that we had a union factory in Connecticut using sustainable natural rubber, right? It was the whole supply chain was ethically sound. And we had investors who would say things to me like, we love what you're doing. We love the traction. We love the branding. But we could get $14 more per unit if we used prison labor. And I would say, ooh.
How much more could they get if you use slave labor too? I mean,
yeah, one could argue that they are similar, very similar, right? And that's where I would say, like, well, we don't need $14 more per unit because the margin is on the digital side. The digital side is infinitely scalable. You make it one time and you sell it an infinite number of times. So you don't need $14 more on the physical product. You're getting it on the digital side. And they'd say, like, yeah, but you're not allowed to give any up. And so that got me really thinking about, like, okay, how do we navigate a corporate world in which the legal responsibility of most corporations is to maximize return to shareholders? That's the legal obligation. And if you make a choice in the company that isn't maximizing return to shareholders, they will sue you. The really interesting thing,
and you will be, everyone is competing for, when you're looking for investment, you're competing for investment dollars. So if you say, yeah, we're going to do a lot of things and try to do good, you're competing with someone, say, you're $10 here. We're going to try to turn that into 50, and then we're going to try to turn it into 1,000. And,
yes.
And so
yes.
It's a competition to get capital to start with.
That's exactly right. That's such an important point, right? You can have two identical companies. Like if there had been a carbon copy of my previous company, but the owner of that company said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's use prison labor. We'll get you an extra $14 per mat. They would have gone with them, right? Because that is exactly what you just described is exactly correct. You're competing against everyone else who's raising capital. And so in that time, what was really interesting, I said before it was 2013 to 2020. I shut it down in 2020. It was still going. It was fine. It was great. I was 8.5 months pregnant in March 2020, and I was over it, right? I wasn't actually interested in doing it anymore. I felt like I wanted to go back to the idea of researching business models, and I wanted to go back to filmmaking, right? I wanted to get back into that. So I started working. So I was writing screenplays and actually making inroads in the industry, and then realized as I was in that process, that my two interests that I thought were sort of divergent, economics and filmmaking, were actually perfect buddies here, that there was an opportunity to actually deploy this economic knowledge for the benefit of the thing that I love and I'm passionate about and want to do and help support, which is filmmaking. And not just my films, other people's films, right? I want there to be an ecosystem in which everyone who wants to make a film, who has something to say, gets to find their audience, gets to connect with them, and not have the biggest problem that we're all facing be just algorithms owned by corporations that surface the things that pay for visibility, right? That there needs to be an alternative to that.
Yeah, I think to take it back to not to defend Bill Friedman or whatever, you have an advantage of you've actually probably read him, which I can't claim to. But traditional, I think, free market economics, they would say you do have a mission, because if you're making shoes, if you make shoes that are of value, and if you can do it at a cost that's affordable to people, then the community supports that mission to make good shoes, and you're part of a community and you're invested in them. But what I see, and this is relevant to what you're doing, it's sort of with the financialization of everything, where it's just what is that most that we can take out of this, and also and that calculation doesn't involve building something it doesn't necessarily, if you can build something sustainable and say you put in $100 and you get $10 back every year for the next 50 years, fine. But if someone else can say, well, you put in $100 now and you'll get $2,000 back next year,
yeah.
then yeah, why have something to stay around? And I think that's what we've seen with so many with in the social media era, and why this is so scary. We've seen all these people build something and then it be taken over by people that are just like that. Their formula always makes much more sense to try to pull out as much as they can, as fast as they can, than build something of any kind of long-term value to.
Right. Yeah. One meeting I had with an investor for that previous company, 10 years ago or something, I said, do you care what the economy looks like in 10 years? And he went, no, we're going to win either way. And I thought, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would love for my neighbors to have a home and food and medical care. So, and I think it's connected. And so so that's the thing where, to go back to Milton Friedman and his friends said, no, we have to ruthlessly pursue profit. But if you go back to the real originator of the idea of markets and all of that, Adam Smith actually understood and wrote about, he wrote The Wealth of Nations and all of that, but he also wrote Moral Sentiments. And that if you go back to what he said, and he talked about the idea that he said the undoing of all of this will be the love of money. So you can actually go back and you can read. That's a paraphrase of a very long section. However, Moral Sentiments, go read it. Adam Smith. Let's plug Adam Smith.
So we're getting very highfalutin here, which but that is great. But tell us how Letterboxd came to your attention, and you had devised a strategy to create a mission-driven company, and tell me what that strategy was, and how Letterboxd came to be a potential test case for that.
Yes. So back in 2020, as I said, shut down that company, became a mom, went back to screenwriting and thinking about, how do you align incentives in small companies to allow them to compete with these large venture-backed tech startups. And in those years, right, equity crowdfunding came online. An organization called a company called WeFunder, that is also a public benefit corporation, was able to pass legislation that allows, instead of just being dependent upon large venture capital firms, that you could actually raise equity investment from unaccredited investors at smaller amounts, but with more investors through those platforms. And they're complicated because they involve SEC regulation and all kinds of legal things and compliance stuff. But I started thinking about it as, what, this is really interesting. It's a really interesting way to think about getting startup capital, but it's actually even more interesting to think about as an exit strategy, right? And because when you have a business and you go and you pitch investors, they want to know, what's the exit strategy? How are they getting their money back?
Right.
And if the only options are available are selling to private equity or a strategic acquisition or an IPO, then all of those incentives that I keep talking about are aligned with that goal, right? The incentives get aligned with the goal of maximizing revenue to sell to the specific set of buyers.
And what happens after that is not who cares?
Is what everyone calls enshittification, right? That's what everyone calls enshittification.
Yeah.
And so, as far as Letterboxd is concerned, when in 2020 I was like, you know what, I'm going to pursue screenwriting. That's what I really love. This is what I'm going to do. As I really started studying the industry, I had never studied it in that same way before, right? Through that economic lens, realizing that these business models mattered, and realizing how, within independent cinema in particular, our dependence on social media and tech platforms to do our marketing is the death of our ability to reach our audiences, right? It is the death of the ability for films to find the people who want to find them, right? Because those people are out there, but it's getting harder to find each other in an environment filled with noise from pay to play things, right? Like if you have a studio or a mini studio that can afford to spend 300% of production budget on marketing, then they're going to buy up all that ad space, flood the market, right? And that's all you know about. You don't know about the incredible thing that somebody on Filmstack made or that a non-D filmmaker made. You don't hear about those things that are happening if you're a festival of films, right? Like if all that's happening. So the incentives that those platforms have are opposed to what filmmakers need. So I started thinking about like, okay, so what's really interesting here, let's look at the ecosystem and think about where are there places that films and filmmakers connect to their authentic audience. And so that's my main interest in Letterboxd, right? Is that I recognized from the beginning that that's a role that Letterboxd is playing, that I started looking into what had the founders spent their time doing, how were they growing it, what was their focus, and recognized that it was really kind of, the last bastion of like organic film audience engagement, word of mouth, all of that. So as
to set this up, can you just tell us briefly the Letterboxd corporate history and where it was at when you started looking at it?
Yeah, so I started thinking about it. I started thinking about it in like 2022 or so, and looking at, okay, so here's this interesting place. It's not owned by a large corporation. They're focusing on this. So the founders started Letterboxd in 2011 and didn't take outside investment until 2023 when they sold a 60% stake to a Canadian company called Tiny. And Tiny, if you read Tiny's website, what it says about itself, Tiny says that they are not a private equity company, that they're a long-term holding company. You can go on their website and read everything about them and what they have to say about themselves. But I recognized, okay, so here's a change, right? Like that's a new phase for them. But it does say on Tiny's website that, they viewed it as a long hold. They were, that this was sort of an investment in the founders and the vision that they had. So whatever has changed between then and now that they are looking to sell it, the thing that matters is who buys it next. Because in that time, the 30 million people who are using Letterboxd, right, have actually created a place for film discovery, especially for independent cinema, global cinema, culturally impactful cinema, right? All of the things that are there. And it doesn't have to be that, right? It can be a tentpole also. We're not excluding them. We're just saying that this is a place that uniquely serves the needs of independent filmmakers and artists. And so as I was strategizing on what I wanted to build with my teammates in Intrinsic for the platform that we were working on, we pitched our platform, to their development, to their web development wing, their web development company called Cactus Lab last fall. And so from October through March, we have been working on the platform that we are building as a collaborative marketing platform. Then the semaphore story broke. And that's really the change.
And
right?
the semaphore story said, tell me what the semaphore story said.
The semaphore story said that Tiny wanted to sell their 60% stake in Letterboxd. And so when that came about, we had spent the whole year, as I said, we were working with the Cactus Lab team on the actual web piece of this, but we were also working with Harvard Law School on a specific set of bylaws that allows a company to bring in mission first, social impact, angel investment, and then give the angel investors an exit strategy to the community using these WeFunder rounds. So we built that over the past year. We built that model, our corporate structure, all of those things at Harvard Law School's Transactional Law Clinic. And we then incorporated in the month of April before the semaphore story came out. We incorporated, got our approval from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And then a few days later, the semaphore story broke. And so my team at Intrinsic, we looked at it and said, our model scales right up to this, right? There are some legal differences based on the fact that it's an acquisition rather than founding a new company, and it's a foreign company. So the SEC has different rules and regulations about how you invest capital in an acquisition of a foreign asset. Lots of more. I can have office hours if anyone else wants to wants to deeper in the weeds on that. But that was the moment in which we realized we had a model that was 80% of the way there, right? In terms of the only thing that we needed was to bring in lawyers, tax auditors, specialists in banking and international transactions who could help us make sure that everything was structured correctly before we opened it up to equity investment. And that, unfortunately, is very expensive because all of those people are have very high billable hours, and you need a bunch of them working together. So every phone call is $2,000.
So you can't just write your bylaws on the back of an envelope there, and
not unless you want the SEC to spend the rest of your life suing you.
Okay. Yeah.
You can, it's different where it comes into play, right? So there's a difference between, you can write your bylaws and you can incorporate a company if the state says you can incorporate it, but equity are securities, right? So there's significant regulation around securities law. And that's the part where it's different to go out and raise equity investment. That's where you do. So equity investment is complicated. Foreign investment is complicated. Bringing unaccredited investors into the mix is complicated. So we have an onion of complicating factors in this particular bid, but that doesn't mean we can't do it. Everything worth doing is hard. So that's why we're doing it.
So just to get to the what ultimately to buy Letterboxd, what's the range that you think you need to raise here?
The range that we need to raise. So I think that there are parts of it that I can speculate on, and then also parts that I can't speculate, because at the end of the day, right, Tiny has engaged LionTree to market the sale.
But LionTree is a big venture capital merchant bank that guides a lot of sales in this.
A lot of sales. Yeah. And so if we just went by the reporting last week, and, I don't know who gave that information to the press in terms of the valuation that was reported was $250 million. So if we were to look at, what is 60% of that, that would indicate the price that they want to get for it. My argument, so like anytime anyone talks about valuation, it's also really important to know that it's not actually scientific. People want to think about it as being scientific, right? And there are different valuation methodologies, and you can look at like discounted cash flow, and you can look at all of these different ways of determining valuation. But as Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay and value is what you get.
Yeah.
Right. And
so you can say my company is worth $100 million, but if all anyone will give you is $1,000 for it, your value is actually $1,000. So
exactly. And I think real estate is a really good analog here in terms of like, if you think about maybe a cottage at the lake that's been in your family for 3 generations or something, right? That has a lot of sentimental value to you, even if a builder would come in and say, oh, this is a knockdown, right? Like that idea of a sale price and value and valuation is really in the eye of the beholder. What is the value of something to you? And my argument is that the value of Letterboxd to the film community is exceptionally high. When I did a little study looking at, 20 films from the last decade, 20 independent films, and about half of them that were considered commercially successful and half of them that did not recoup and were considered underperformers because they had stars, they had some advantage that people were trying to figure out why didn't they succeed. And the independent films that were successful had spent multiples of their production budget on marketing, and the films that were underperformers had spent less than their production budget on marketing. But if you then sort of pulled out those films and you looked at them on Letterboxd and like how much engagement, how many reviews had been written about them, the ones that had high engagement on Letterboxd had significantly lower than average marketing spends to still be in that successful category of recruitment. So there's a meaningful difference here when we think about the value of Letterboxd to independent filmmakers. The value is that it connects you to your audience. And that's the problem everyone's facing, right? Everyone's talking about how to build an audience. If we start talking about YouTube filmmakers and all of that, that's where they're building an audience, right?
Now I go to festivals, and that's the great thing. It's heartbreaking. You meet these filmmakers. I made a great film. It's well received here.
Yeah.
This little company is going to release it. How do we let anyone know about that? They have no marketing budget. So what do I do? Throw a party? So that was the thing about Letterboxd. It was this miracle sort of place filling in the gap that prevents independent filmmakers from getting in touch with that. So
yeah, and that's exactly where that is the critical thing here to think about. Who is the next owner of Letterboxd? Because the next owner of Letterboxd will have a disproportionate amount of power over independent film.
And if that owner is a studio, they will have a very particular agenda there. They're not buying it, but we can look at when the story came out that Netflix was buying part of me was like, they have the money too. They can buy whatever they want. And if they decide they're going to buy it, probably not much we can do to stop them. But you look back at Rotten Tomatoes, because it was bought it was acquired by Warner Brothers some time ago, and everybody at the time said, "Oh, that's great! They're going to promote they're going to use Rotten Tomatoes to become a Warner Brothers film place." So the choice you face when you do that is, if you're sort of this neutral platform for all film, you tilt towards one thing, you immediately destroy the site and lose your audience. So to maintain it, you've got to not favor your own thing. And you always hear stories about people suspecting Rotten Tomatoes leaned on the scale a little bit, but it's if they did, it's at the margins. And the terrible thing for Warner Brothers is they're not in the business of running these outside media sites, but they're kind of obliged to do this one and keep it fair whether they want to or not, because otherwise they have nothing.
And what you said right there, right, that they're obliged to whether they want it or not, connects to the point that connects to something that you said at the beginning, where absolutely Netflix, we all know that Netflix has the cash. They in fact have $2.8 billion of extra cash that if they decided, right, they can pay any amount they want for this. But the question is, Netflix is also very smart, right? They're smart people. They understand how to calculate ROI. And so on this particular case, the question isn't, can they stack dollars to the moon and back using their breakup money? Yeah, they can, of course they can. However, they're smart business people. So they're going to look at this and they're going to say, do we want to have a Rotten Tomatoes asset that we actually can't monetize the way that we want to, because then the customer base will flee? And they have to look at it and decide what is the most valuable thing, right? Like Netflix, just like you said at the beginning, where when you're pitching a company and you're raising venture funding, and the funders are considering you compared to all of the other people who are asking for money, the same thing happens at any sort of strategic buyer, where they're going to say, okay, we have $2.8 billion to spend. Where do we get the most ROI? And my question is, do you get the most ROI from a community that has demonstrated that it is owner sensitive in terms of that the reason that the asset exists is because the founders have spent 15 years preserving the integrity. And if you don't do that, are you able to credibly preserve the asset? I don't know the answer to that.
And we've also seen as cautionary tales when a new buyer comes in and people don't feel, as hot as a platform might be, if the community doesn't feel like you are being true to their principles, how that hot platform can turn to dust in seconds. Like I refer you to the Tumblr acquisition at Yahoo, which was Tumblr was the biggest thing. I think they paid something like $2 billion for it.
Yeah.
And a year after it came into Yahoo, it was essentially worthless.
Exactly. And that's the question that every single buyer, right? It's presented in the press as if here are these behemoths and no one can compete with them. And that's a false narrative, because every single interested buyer has to do the same calculation of return on investment. And they have to figure out, are they able to credibly preserve the asset they want to buy? And if they can't credibly preserve the asset, then the value of that asset to them is very low. That's what makes it so interesting about the community owning it, is that the asset value to us, the incentives are aligned. The community is aligned, the funders are aligned, the asset is aligned. So we're actually, even though it makes total sense to me that we're excluded from the narrative, right? It makes total sense to me that we're excluded because, of course, we are, right? I'm a mom in Massachusetts. I'm not, an Ellison child. However,
you weren't at Sun Valley.
I was not at Sun Valley, right? I had a couple of invitations to Sundance, and I couldn't afford to go because I couldn't afford childcare. So that's the difference, right? And what the thing is here, right, that we need to look at. And the really exciting thing that I'm thrilled to be able to announce, because we've just crossed this threshold. When we started this, 6.5 weeks ago now, we understood how complicated the SEC rules and regulations are about bringing in unaccredited investors, and the difference just really quickly between, so to be an accredited investor, you have to have a net worth of more than $1 million, excluding your primary home, right? Like you own a home plus another $1 million, or you have had multiple years of income over $200,000 a year, and you have to be able to prove that you expect to keep getting that it's not a one-off. So
you have to fill out a lot of annoying forms too.
Fill out a lot of annoying forms, but you have to have a lot of money, right? And that's the thing, when we keep going back to this idea of aligning incentives, the SEC, even as WeFunder has come online, WeFunder and other groups now too, but we work with WeFunder because they're also a public benefit corporation. So WeFunder in particular is, aligned with us again on this values alignment with them. And the SEC limits all companies from raising more than $5 million a year from unaccredited investors. That's the limit. No company is allowed to raise more than that. And that's obviously not going to be enough to purchase Letterbox'd in this case. So we had to be very strategic about adapting our business model for something that was going to cost a lot more, right? Because we designed the business model for startups where you're raising less than 5 million, so it's fine. And we had to put together a team and do this legal research and make sure we were in compliance with the SEC. And we also couldn't talk about it until it was done. And those are SEC compliance rules. And so to arrive at the point that we are now, where we have figured out the roadmap and we're ready to press go on, we have to do a financial audit, we have to prepare investor disclosures, we have to do those things, but we've gotten there. We have the roadmap, we're ready to press go. We need to pay multiple tens of thousands of dollars to have all of those things accomplished. But the really thrilling thing is that we are going to be allowed to invite people to invest up to unaccredited investors to invest up to $5 million in this equity campaign. The minimum investment as set by WeFunder, the platform, and the SEC because of all of the tax regulations and paperwork and whatnot. The minimum investment is $100. That's their minimum. But that is what we're going to let people in on, and we can raise up to $5 million from that, and then we have to wait another year. So what we are thrilled to finally have permission to say, we didn't have permission to say it until about an hour before this phone call from the legal team, is that everyone who supports our Seed and Spark campaign, we will start when we open up that Reg CF crowd equity fundraising, we will open it first to the people who supported our Seed and Spark campaign. It's absolutely not mandatory. It's just it's a thank you, honestly, right? It's a thank you. It's an opportunity for people to be the first ones in on something, to be the first group of people that we are able to bring into our coalition of larger investors, so that every year following, we will be allowed to do another round of Reg CF. So the SEC, it's the SEC is limiting it, but we can bring in $5 million a year worth of unaccredited investment from people. And that's how, with our unique bylaw structure, we have Class A stock and Class B stock, right? The Class A stock is where the larger investors, that's the stock that they have. And the Class B stock is what people coming in through WeFunder will have. So the first year we can sell them $5 million, and the next year we can sell another $5 million. And we can keep doing that and buying back their shares so that it goes like this. Right. And it's not an overnight process, but it's an SEC regulation. It's a long game, but we have done the work and we have the path, and we're thrilled. We're so excited to be able to finally talk about it. We were bound by SEC laws before, and we've gotten there, and I'm thrilled to be able to announce that here.
Well, this is great. I mean, I can't wish you enough hope for success here, and you have to come back and keep us updated on how it's going. Someone asked if a transcript of this will be made available later. You know what? I believe that Substack Live gives me the possibility when we post this to create a transcript. So I'll look at that, and if so, I will attach it to the post, which will go up later today. But someone, as someone said, this is incredible because it's a site that means so much to all of us, and the thought of it going into a big corporation. By the way, the real cautionary comp is Fox's acquisition of MySpace, which MySpace was the hottest. MySpace was social media. It was all of social media when they bought it, and they had all kinds of synergistic plans and all sorts of things they would do. And less than a year later, it was nothing. It was a worthless asset, and they tried to restart it as a music site and it was just dead in the water.
MySpace, Tumblr, Twitter, right? Like, we've seen this story and the variations. Like, obviously Twitter's a little different with the private, but it's the same story, right? It's like when the buyer is not in alignment with the community. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And let's hope we can keep this site that's so important to us all in the right hand. Could do so much good for the community. You'll have to, as events warrant, you'll have to come back and update us and tell us more about it. But thank you, Elizabeth, so much for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us. And please keep us posted. We'll see you again here soon.
Thank you so much. We are
and thank you, FilmStack, for coming and joining us today. We're back here almost every day at 11 o'clock with a great conversation. So see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.